The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's PSMJ podcast presents What Profitable AEC Firms Need to Know About Overtime. My name is Kathy Cesari and I'm thrilled to join you today. Before we get started, I do need to go over a couple of housekeeping details. First, the Q&A session. Please feel free to add your questions to the panel. I'm going to monitor those. Some people did submit some beforehand. Thank you very much. And if you don't understand something or you want me to interrupt, I know Brian will allow me to do that. But if not, we're going to try to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, we have continuing education credits. So I will send out an attendance certificate if you need that to submit to a board or internally. If you have more than one person in the room and you need everyone to get credit, please send in a attendance sheet. And the address to use, you could use mine, of course, but you could, to get quicker service, it's customerservice@psmj.com. So that is also where, if you are an AIA member, just send over your number to that desk and they will register you for your credit. It's one education unit. And then lastly, when we're done, I'm going to work on getting those links up on YouTube and also on SoundCloud in our channels, and so that everyone can listen to them. You guys will get it first, obviously, the attendees. And I'll send you out your attendance certificate, and you have to listen to it live to get that, your recording link, and any other links that Brian might mention during the presentation. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce Brian Flynn. Hi, Brian.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. I know you're in Texas, so I'm glad you're doing all right.
So far, so good.
Oh, that's
the worst
great.
is over.
Oh, that's good news. That's good news. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe we can go into what we want to cover today. We do have an hour, so, but it goes by quick. So a little bit of your background.
Okay, sure. By training, I'm a chemical engineer. I spent my entire career doing environmental engineering. I was a founding partner at Environmental Resources Management, which today is, by their account, the largest environmental engineering consulting firm on earth. I left ERM about 20 years ago, thought I was riding off into the sunset to sit on the beach, but I was too restless, and I've actually spent the last 20 years or so doing management consulting and a little bit of training here and there. Management consulting is focused on the profitability of A&E firms. I have a model that we use called the SUM model, and it addresses utilization of manpower, pricing, and salary to expense ratio. And the result is this model actually gives you a powerful tool for understanding how to drive your consulting ship, if you will.
Yes, I know that you've been, that's your expertise. I know that people reach out to you and you seem to be able to, you've been working with so many firms that you could kind of look at their numbers sometimes and give them an idea of where they need to concentrate their efforts. So, and I know we keep you busy, so that's great. Did you want to do a poll first, did you say, or did you want to talk about what we're going to cover today?
Yeah, let me cover the goals of this podcast are simple. One is I want to kind of go over or review with y'all the basics of personnel or workforce planning. And a lot of times it's not paid as much attention to as it ought to. And it has a powerful, very powerful effect on the profitability of the firm or lack thereof. The other thing I want to do is I want to show you the the powerful effect that billable overtime has on the basic profitability of an A&E firm. And in that regard, there's a kind of a workforce modeling tool that we've got, and I'm going to walk you through it towards the end of this discussion today, so you can see how it works, and it's available for sale.
All right, so let's do that first poll. And I'm going to bring it up on the screen. I don't think you're going to be able to see the poll.
That's okay.
Okay.
This is the question on who hires in advance of the work.
It says, does your firm hire in advance of the work, pretty much? And does not just do it on contracted workload. So if everyone can try to give us some input, and I'll stop it when we have a super majority, so to speak. Okay, maybe a couple more seconds and then I'm gonna close it. And Brian, again, I don't think you're gonna be able to see the responses, but I will read them out for everybody. And also because some people listen to this afterwards, so it's good to have that in the recording. Okay, so I'm gonna close it. And I'm gonna share it with everyone. Yes, wait a minute, I gotta move. Nope, I gotta do this. All right, yes is 19%, no, 22%, on occasion, 58%, never is 1%.
Okay. All right, there was kind of a point to that question. Let me kind of go over some basics of personnel planning. First of all, the structure of your workforce, that is, how many partners do you have? How many senior project managers? How many project architects or engineers, et cetera, technicians do you have? A lot of times we have a model in our head that it should be a pyramidal structure. In reality, time and time again, what I've seen is it's kind of like one of those candlestick bowling pins that has a bulge in the middle. And it's a little narrower at the bottom and definitely narrower at the top. And sometimes people get excited about that, but actually it's generally that way because that fits your client's requirements. Generally, an A&E firm is producing, whether you want to believe it or not, high-end work that the client needs done, and that means you can't have a huge workforce of relatively inexperienced people at the bottom and only a few at the top. It's got to be skewed towards the middle and top, and so it's got to be that way. And usually it turns out that after you get over the fright that it's not a pyramid, you realize it's probably pretty close to where you want it to be. But here's where it's usually not that close. I have a little saying that you can run a jobs machine or a profit machine, but you basically can't do both at the same time. Oh, you might if you really grow fast and you keep adding jobs. But basically, you should be hiring behind the work, not in anticipation of work. And to kind of drive home that point, you can construct an economic scenario where, let's say, a firm has 100 employees and a certain workload, and they're making a 30% return on net, which is very good. And for a lot of firms who aren't there, they actually could do it if they knew how. But they're making 30%. You can also construct the same firm with more jobs and the same workload and lower utilization, and it could have a 0% profit. And guess what? That firm would have approximately 150 employees as opposed to the 100 employees in the highly profitable firm. So if you think about it, if you turn that around a little bit, it means that if you're rocking along at 20% or something and you add a few extra people because you're concerned about maybe some project that might come along or a certain skill set that maybe you could subcontract, but maybe you're deciding this time, maybe you got enough work that you keep that person half-time busy. When you start adding those jobs, you don't see a big impact. But after a while, you do. It's sort of like a slow profit torture, if you will. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Most firms I study have too many people. I don't tell them go out and have a layoff. What I'll tell them is grow your business, hold on to the workforce you have. If you lose 2 people, replace 1. And one fine day, a couple of years out, you'll be exactly where you want to be. So it's not traumatic. Another thing I'd want to point out is that it's very important that your administrative processes be simple and well-designed and pertinent, and that your marketing be focused, not a scattershot kind of approach, but more like a rifle shot. And there has to be a lot of training of the right people to do your marketing. And a lot of the marketing should occur on the job and with your current clients. And this is not a marketing seminar, but I'm pointing those things out because administration and marketing, if they're inefficient, they take manpower, personnel power away from billable hours, and they impact profitability negatively. Okay. Now, another thing I'll point out is you might ask, well, what's kind of like a rule of thumb on how much overtime can you do? And first of all, I'll say that it's cultural. In some firms, the culture is such that you could do very little overtime. In other firms, it's kind of undefined. My experience is this, that a properly motivated and trained workforce is capable of sustained 10% overtime, which is also, by the way, highly profitable. But they have to understand why they're doing that. And if they've got that work ethic, they're also going to have high morale. Morale breaks down if you start going past that 10%. If you run 20% for 3 months, you're going to start breaking the place apart. You're going to be running a sweatshop, and people are going to start to leave. And so generally what you try to do is work around 10% overtime where people meeting their utilization goals. And then if you start exceeding that for a few months by a little bit, you got to get the hiring machine going so that you don't get the thing out of whack and start running up towards 20% and getting people to leave, go out the door. So it's kind of a rule of thumb, but it's a good way to look at managing the firm, and it gives you an idea of when you should, in general, be doing some hiring. Another thing I might point out is that there is, let's do this. You got a poll on comp time?
Yep, let me see. Yeah, we'll launch that next.
Yeah, let's do it right now.
Okay. So we ask, does your firm provide comp time to professional employees to make up for overtime worked? And put in your answer. There's only select one. And a little bit longer, and we'll close the poll. All right. Couple of seconds, I'll be closing. Okay. And let me share those results. Yes, by the hour, we have 16%. Yes, but with limits, 15%. Only in special limited circumstances, 34%. And never, 34%.
Okay. Well, those are good and interesting results. Generally, when I'm asked about comp time, I suggest that policy should be something like you only do it in special circumstances. For example, in my firm, the only time we did comp time was when people had to work on a weekend, or if they had an extensive amount of field work, some of that they could get back as comp time. So it was quite limited, but it was also simple. It was easy to administer. Okay. Another thing I'll point out is that every firm has employees who are 9-to-5ers.
Mm-hmm.
The suggestion you think I'm going to say is get rid of them. No, that's not the case. Unless you got too many, then you got to try to figure out what to do. But you can tolerate 9-to-5ers when you're thinking of workload. It's just that you can't have too many. And the point I'd like to make is that if you run your personnel tight and you're running around 10% overtime, you should be making a very healthy profit. And if you are making that healthy profit, you should use a portion of that to fund a substantial employee bonus program, a performance incentive program. Okay? It's performance incentive. It's not profit sharing. It's performance incentive. You have to define what do you want to incentivize, and one of the things you want to incentivize is the willingness to work some extra hours. So if you've got 9-to-5ers, in my little model, they're not going to do so well, all of the things being equal, on bonus day compared to a person who is working 5 or 10% overtime consistently and doing good work on their projects. So it's kind of the way I look at it.
We do have a couple of questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. So someone asks, how do you legally provide comp time instead of overtime?
Okay. What was that again, please?
How do you legally provide comp time in lieu of overtime?
How you provide comp time?
Right, instead of giving them the overtime pay.
Okay, well, in my administrative simplicity type model, it's like, okay, you worked Saturday because there was an office call in on a project that had to be done right away. And do you want comp time for the day? Yeah, okay. Let's agree on what day you're taking off. And that's it. Notice there's no forms, there's no administrative ladder that the request has to climb or anything like that. It's just simple. Was there another question?
Yeah, there's a couple more if you don't mind. Overtime is a slippery slope. How do you measure productivity? Yeah.
Well,
stretching out the time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is a good
very good point. If your personnel structure is constructed so that it can handle your existing workload with something around 10% overtime, 44 hours a week, then what will actually happen is that people will tend not to overcharge projects or work the overtime because they're inefficient. Now, if a person is inefficient and they're working overtime, what generally happens is the managers start to notice that there's one or two people who consistently can't meet their utilization goal, even though there's plenty of work for everybody to do. And that's because the project managers know that that person is inefficient and they're running away from them sometimes.
Right.
And that's your tip off that that's an employee you got to work with and do something about. First, you got to do training. And if that doesn't work, then you're going to have to probably try to help them find a job somewhere else. But the key to it is there's plenty of work. In fact, let me segue that into the whole issue of utilization. In some places, the idea of utilization, which is theoretically speaking, it's the percentage of salary dollars that are spent on projects, which means for an individual, it can be salary dollars or hours. So first of all, individuals should have clear utilization goals, and they're clear if you tell them your utilization goal is not 85%, but it's whatever. It's 1,800 hours billable a year. That's your utilization goal. That's a clear, simple goal. When you give a percent, people aren't quite sure how the percentage is calculated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason utilization sometimes has a bad name is that supervisors will beat up on people when they don't make their utilization goal. Well, my suggestion is that if you get yourself to the point where your workload and a reasonable amount of overtime are in balance, the utilization goals, reasonable utilization goals at that point will be met without a lot of sweat. And utilization will become a floor for most employees and not a ceiling. Okay, were there any other questions?
Yeah, there are. I hate to throw you off, but I think one person wanted to go back a little bit to that hiring behind the work. You know, we're in a tight labor market now. And do you think that they're afraid that they're not going to be able to hire in time to meet the project needs? What do you say to that? In many areas of the country.
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends how much appetite you have for change and for risk.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the levers are, if I have to, I could bring on more part-timers. And they're around. In this modern world, it's a gig economy, but there are a lot of there's still a substantial number of working couples, for example, where one wants to work part-time and the other wants to work full-time, and that can provide people when you need them, but only when you need them. The other thing is, if the labor market gets really tight, you might consider the unthinkable, which is, gee, do I have some lousy clients that maybe I could replace them now with better clients because I can't get more people to do more work.
Right.
So it's sort of like my ability to produce revenue or projects is the same, but maybe this is the time to gently fire some clients that you don't want around anymore because they're hard to manage, and or this is the most usual case, is that they want discounts and they're always bugging you about your price and your labor rates. Mm-hmm. Well, the next time they come for your project, you drop them because you couldn't hire another person. You know what I mean, to make it simple. And I'm sure there's more creative people on this call than me who could come up with some other things.
Right.
But it may help you migrate towards more profitable work in the worst case, which is not so bad.
Correct. And then finally, then I'll let you move on. But I know someone put this in prior to the podcast about, you have these extra people and they are working on, RFPs, and they're doing research. So you need to address probably overhead utilization as well. And I think you're going to do that, correct?
Yeah, I guess my basic comment on that is that any A&E firm has to be firmly focused on the outside of their shop, not the inside. So they're focused on finding clients and doing their clients' work, and everybody's focused on that. And not so much some sort of internal research project. That's kind of okay to do if you don't have quite enough work and you have a need to get something like that done. Then instead of having to furlough somebody, you can put them to work on that and get something useful out of it. But in general, there's not a lot of that kind of stuff around.
Right. But we can address that as we go. So you where should we head off next? Do you want to show us the tool, or do you want to talk a little bit about the need for a tool, model tool?
Yeah, let me just point a few other things out that I wanted to get off my chest. I've already hinted at full-time versus part-time. The suggestion is that you should have a fairly vigorous part-time labor force. Not every firm has that. It's quite possible to do. And one of the advantages, there's two advantages to doing it. One is that the part-timers are only used on billable work. So guess what their utilization is? It's 100%. So to the extent that they're crowding out a future full-time hire that you don't need, you're actually improving your profit margin by having them. Okay? The other thing is they're a great workload balancing tool, because let's say your workload goes down a little bit. Well, it takes a little time, but you can divert some work away from the part-timers to the full-time people. And you can do vice versa when the workload goes up. You can start getting some of the part-timers to at least tolerate some additional work for a while you're getting your hiring machine in gear and getting people in the door. So there's a lot to be said for that. And I have a rule of thumb for that, for whatever it's worth to y'all. And that's that, to me, for the technical force, about 1 out of every 6 employees should be a part-timer. And when I say part-time, I mean 50% or 20 hours a week. Okay.
Are you looking towards the people who maybe wanted to retire, but you guys are so busy now? I mean, I think I know a few people like that. They want to retire, but their firms are just too busy, and they'd like to go to part-time.
That's a possibility, as long as their skills are still sharp. Sometimes they're not, but a lot of times they are. And then there are younger people who don't want to work full-time but would like to keep their hand in. I mean, when you have 2 spouses and one of them is doing the child care work, that spouse might really like to have a job that's maybe 10 or 20 hours a week under the right circumstances. I mean, if the kids are already in school, 20 hours makes more sense. If they want to keep their hand in and the children are still pretty little, they still might be able to eke out 10. And that's a win-win for everybody.
All right.
Okay. The last thing I'll suggest, too, to think about is a pet project of mine. It's called Paraprofessionals. A&E firms generally don't do that. The closest they get is a small number of interns, which is great. Do that. That's also a flywheel in your labor force, our interns. I like the intern model, where if you can get the intern to work like a whole semester, and make sure you pay them. None of this free intern stuff.
No.
But also, the paraprofessionals, I think the model is kind of in the legal profession, where they've got some really skilled people who know their way around case law and documentation, et cetera. You can tell them, do me a civil subpoena. Here's the facts, and they can really whip that out. There's a lot of things in architecture and engineering, not the majority obviously, but there's a lot of things that are kind of cookbooky And if you wanted to, you could probably create a paraprofessional position for somebody to do that. You might say, Flynn, you ought to walk the walk instead of talking the talk. And I'll admit that in my career, I did a little of that. And I think the most successful thing we did was we had a full-time paraprofessional whose only job was to beat databases into shape and present the data in nice, pretty tables and understandable graphs, and sometimes using statistics on the data. But that's an example of something that you can pull out a lot of times from different projects and give to a paraprofessional rather than have the say an engineer doing it, young engineer. Okay. Let's see. We have another poll. Okay, let's do this. Can we have the poll question on who pays professionals overtime?
I have, do you pay professional employees below partner level for billable overtime? That one?
That's it. That one.
Thank you. Okay. It says, do you pay professional employees below partner level for billable overtime? And polling is open. We're asking to select just one. All right, a couple of seconds more. And I'm going to close and share. All right, here we go. Okay, so straight time, yes, straight time. It comes in at 29%. Yes, time and a half, 13%. Only in limited circumstances, 20%. And 38% saying no.
Okay. That's pretty broad. Pretty broad range. And this is, I mean, what the right thing to do in this case is, it's really up to y'all. You have to be cognizant of local and state labor laws, which I wouldn't profess to be an expert on. I think part of it has to do with whether or not you've got a good bonus program or a performance incentive program. If you do, that can take you towards not paying overtime. And it's obviously it's important that you're clear about what happens. And you'll see in a little bit when we look at this modeling tool that we have, that whether you pay nothing for overtime or straight time for overtime, either one of those situations makes a marked impact on your profitability.
Brian, do you measure utilization at 40 hours or more?
Excuse me?
John asked, do you measure utilization on 40 hours or 44 hours?
Okay. When I look at an individual, let's say there's 40 standard work hours in the week. That's your expectation. And that's not the case for every company. Some of them are 38, 36, whatever. If the person works 44 hours, and so 44 billable hours,
right.
44 divided by 40 is the rate that you show when you're looking at your monthly performance statistics by individual. Okay, that's really a billability rate, not strictly utilization. When you step back and look at the entire firm, utilization are the salary dollars charged to projects divided by the total salary dollars paid. So for example, if I had one firm that was only in business for 1 week and the person worked 44 hours and got paid straight time for all of them, then in that case, the utilization would be 100%. If they didn't get paid for overtime, the utilization would be 110%, which is okay. So you have to be a little bit careful of definitions. and firms play games with these things. They'll have a lot of firms I've worked with, they have utilization reports every, twice a month or whatever, or once a month. And you see percentages for each individual. And then when you play a game of 21 questions, you find out that it's actually a net utilization rate that they've calculated billable hours divided by available hours, which is not the same because they factored out vacation, holidays, sick time, et cetera. And the number looks higher, it looks better, but it's really not that good a number.
We have a lot of questions coming in, Brian.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, we'll take one more. We have the question, and it comes up a lot, where managers are working on proposals, which often affects utilization and creates overtime in some cases. Should we include proposal time in utilization goals?
I think that one could go either way. My advice to people has been base your utilization goals on your standard work hours. And there should be some sort of analysis of that. For example, let's say you have a senior project manager and they stink at finding new work, but they're pretty good proposal writers and they're great, what you call in the marketing business, they're great farmers. Once you give them clients to work with, they know how to farm that field and find add-on projects with the client, but they'll never find you another new client somewhere else. Okay. So, and there are metrics on how much time marketing should take. They're rough metrics, but you should apply them to that person's part of the marketing plan. For example, if you say, I want you to get continuing work with 10 clients you have, you can actually calculate a back of the envelope number of hours that should be spent a year doing that. And that should be subtracted from 100%. And then basically the rest of it is billable. And you notice I left out administration. I don't know what a senior project manager should be doing in terms of administering the company. To me, the answer is nothing. That's a job for the partners to worry about, and an HR person if you have one, and a CFO. And sometimes they'll say, well, I got to do timesheets. I have to review timesheets. Well, that should be billed to the projects that are involved. So you can come up with a number. It should be based on a standard work week. And this goes back to the other point I made earlier. If you're working 10% overtime, people don't have any problems meeting their utilization goals because it was based on a 40-hour week.
All right. Do you want to go to the tool now, or what do you want to do?
I want to take a nap. Okay. I'll do that later. Yeah, let me see. Let me look at my list of little things. Yeah, okay.
Because we do have questions, but we'll try to get to them.
Yeah, let's do the last poll question, and then we'll roll the model out for people to look at.
Because we do have questions. I just want to say that if we don't get to them, Brian is really good. I send them to him. I gather them all up, and I send them to him, and he tries to answer them. So we're not going to forget them.
Good on time too, relative to the hour.
And so get those questions in, because if we don't get to them, we will try to get to them. So, all right, last one. Sorry. Do you pay professional employees below the partner level for non-billable overtime? Just one answer, and let me launch it. Sorry about that. And just answer one answer for this. And we'll close it when we have a good amount of people. I think we have so many people on that's why we have a lot of questions. But as I said, put them in, and hopefully we'll get to them, or he'll cover them in some way.
Well, you know what we'll do? We'll just, I'll show everybody this model tool.
Right.
Um,
And then see
and if we've got time left over, we'll just take more questions until we get to the top of the hour.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna close it in a couple of seconds and then I'll share the results. Okay, closing, let me share. So 19% say yes, straight time, 10% yes, time and a half, 12% only in limited circumstances, 59% say no.
Okay. So that's kind of what you'd expect if you did a little riffing off of the other similar question about the professionals overtime. Okay. All right. Oh, you know what? You were supposed to ask me a question.
Oh yeah, so I know, and a lot of people that have come to your podcast before know that you have a book, and we have 2 volumes, volume 1 and 2, and it's available. And a lot of people have bought your books, but they are on the website. Just look under books. I think it's the first one, and you do get a deal if you buy 2 of them. But yeah, it people love it, and it contains mostly what you talk about all the time and what you do for our clients, our customers. When you visit and you look at their books and you see what's going on, and you really do hone in on profitability. So it's and it's called engineering, but you said that it's really for any professional firm. So
Right.
if they haven't already.
Let me just make a few quick comments.
Mhm.
The book is on PSMJ's website under books. You go books, financial management, and you'll find it. It's something like profit maximization for engineering firms, but you could actually use it for a law firm if you wanted to. The other thing is basically everything I've said today is in that book.
Right.
And a lot more on other subjects near and dear to profitability. It's all there. So I suggest you take a look at it, and if you want to buy it, buy it. So all right, let's go to the modeling tool. Now, as I understand it, everybody on the call can actually they can see it now, right?
Yeah, we've had it up on the instructions tab. So
right. Well, like any good model, it's got instructions. I'm not going to read you the instructions. I'm just going to point out that the most important instruction on this page is make a backup copy of the file before you start playing with it, in case you mess it up, because the coding in this file is not locked, and that's on purpose, so that some of you all, if you get this tool, you may want to modify it or play with it some more. I've seen a number of firms where you got a very talented CFO that could take a tool like this as a starting point and really hyper customize it for themselves. And so we left all of the thing open. It's not locked. Okay. Now the way it works, I'll just give you kind of a guided tour. If you look at this page, this is the base case workforce. This is your workforce. The blue columns you put in. So if I just look at one of them, let's say you have 8 partners. So the FTEs is 8, and they have an average salary of $145,600 a year. The machine calculates their direct labor rate as salary, $70. You put in your target utilization rate that you have for them based on 40 hours or whatever your standard hours are per week. And then the actual billing rates that you get for your principals. And you can do this for all of your labor categories. So this is a way of basically summarizing your workforce. And it can then go through it'll automatically go through the mechanical calculations. And let me just run the page down a little bit, where it comes up with total payroll there. And over here, billable payroll. And it calculates indirect labor. I said that wrong. Wait a minute. Yeah, okay. Indirect labor, you have to input to it your non-labor overhead costs and the cost of your pass-throughs, not before markup, subcontractors, reimbursables like travel, other non-direct costs, and then what your true markup rate is. In this case, in this example, was 8%. So it'll calculate net revenue, which is labor revenue, this thing, plus markups, that thing. And it'll calculate profit. In this case, a little over $3 million. The return on net revenue is the profit divided by the net revenue is 20.6%. These three parameters here, utilization, salary expense ratio, and overall multiplier, are all explained in my simple book. But these basically, this is the percentage of your payroll used on projects. This is total payroll plus non-labor overhead divided by total payroll. And this is net revenue divided by labor costs on projects. These three parameters are in a simple equation that calculates return on net. And you see when you put it in the equation, if you looked at there's the equation up there. Everybody knows what J24 is, right? It's showing that it calculated the actual profit or return on net per the books so that the thing worked. It's put in there as a double check. Okay. So that's your base case workforce. Now there is a little module here. This is where you could, for example, let me pick a good one. With entry-level architects or engineers, say this firm's got 20, you could input 16 full-time and 8 part-time for a total of 20 FTEs. And this thing has some things in it to make sure that you don't input numbers that don't make sense. But this is so you can play around with what happens if I wind up with some of my labor force as being part-time. Okay? Now the next tab, this shows, wait a minute, let me go back here. On the base case workforce, you had to input what overtime percentages you want the model to look at. So here we put 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10%. Okay. So then when you get to overtime, no pay, this is the spreadsheet for 2% overtime. It's the same calculations as the basic workforce, except there's more billable hours now. And you can see the 3 million and change went up to about 3.5 million in profit. Okay. And basically the utilization went up. Salary expense ratio stayed about the same or the same. And the multiplier went down a little bit only because there was more emphasis on the part of the workforce or the weighted part of the workforce that had a slightly lower labor multiplier than other parts. And this thing goes on and on. There's a similar spreadsheet or part of the spreadsheet for all 5 cases. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you go all the way down to the bottom where you have 10% overtime, that 3 million profit is now north of 5 million. And this is my point about the powerful effect of overtime. Now this is unpaid. So you got $2 million of unpaid overtime that was billable, that went straight to the bottom line. Okay. Now there's another module here that assumes that you're paying all your overtime at straight time. Okay. And that all the overtime is billable time. Okay. And again, if you wander down to the last case where it's 10%, that 5 million profit shrunk a little down to about 4.5 million. Okay. It's still significantly higher than the 3 million you had with no overtime at all, even though you paid for it. Okay. We summarize the results with 2 graphs. One is annual profit versus percent overtime. So and two curves, one for the blue paid overtime, the other one unpaid overtime. And again, you go out to 10%, you can see 4.5 million, about 5.2 million. Okay. But the base case, no overtime at all, you were just a tad over 3 million. So it's a powerful effect. And the return on net is just a calculation, and it shows the return on net going from 20 to 27 or to 32, depending on whether or not you paid overtime. It's really, it's the point, it's the main point I want to make about structuring your workforce, because if it's structured right where it's tight, it's easy to have overtime that's devoted to projects, and that really positively impacts your profitability. And then there's also a summarization of the three dimensionless parameters of S, U, and M. And you got to watch the scales. This isn't a very big drop in multiplier, but it's because of the weighted effect of the lower multiplier job categories in this case. Sometimes it goes the other way. It just depends. And the other, see, I'm playing with it. Utilization, you see, shoots up when you're not paying overtime. It goes up fairly substantially when you are. Remember, because now the base that you're dividing into the salaries applied to projects is going into a bigger salary base because you're paying overtime. Okay, so that's a guided tour.
Yeah, would you do this for overall, or would you do it for bigger projects? The tool?
Could you do this for a project?
Yeah, I mean, larger projects, not your everyday projects, but.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, could you use it for a specific project to see about to get a handle on your overtime for that one project?
No, I don't think so. On projects, what you should do is you should be calculating the profitability of each project, and
Okay.
And that isn't all that difficult to do, and I'm pretty sure that most accounting systems will do it, although they kind of, sometimes I think they make it kind of complicated. And those projects can be followed, but this is basically for the whole firm.
Firm-wide.
A project doesn't have its utilization, for example. It's all billable, presumably. Should be all billable.
Right.
But you can certainly calculate project profits.
All right. You want to take some questions, or you?
Yeah, I take questions until we run out of time.
I know we have a few, but some people said that they can wait for theirs. So, what would you target as a multiplier?
I'm sorry, a multiplier?
Yes, I'm sorry.
What's the question?
What would you target as a good multiplier?
Oh, I don't know. Well, okay, there's a couple ways to look at it. If you look at the A&E business, the average runs around 3.1 or 3.2. Okay?
Yeah, and we
that
have
may not
surveys for that.
Be your target. It depends on your marketplace.
Right.
So if you're in a marketplace, this is the one I hear the most, is it's fairly or very competitive, and you have to have a lower labor multiplier. Well, that can be your target, but then you better have a high utilization target to go along with it, because the real business is M times U. And we teach this in the financial management course that PSMJ does. MU is the revenue factor. So you have to make up for lower revenue per hour by having more billable hours per unit workforce. And that's how you have to do your planning.
Okay, that might go into this. In your experience, how many firms, percentage-wise, measure utilization incorrectly?
I mean, how do they measure it incorrectly?
Well, he said, for example, Dawn says, using a base that does not include 2,000, you said 80 hours, but rather one that takes out holidays and PTO and all that.
Right. I'm not a big fan of taking the holidays and PTO out because
Yeah.
they cost you money, and it makes the figures look higher, and people start to forget. They're saying, "Oh, wow, we were 70% utilized last month," but really, that's in an average firm, 8% is holidays and vacation, and you're really at 62%, which is kind of mundane. So, I mean, it's okay. You want to do it that way, do it that way. But if you give somebody a goal, don't give them that percentage. Never.
Right. Do you see that done often? Do you see that done often, or do you see it done as you suggest?
Usually I see people cooking the books on utilization where it's really a net utilization and numbers higher. That's what I usually see.
So when you talked a little bit about the project managers not doing, you want them to be working on the projects, but they do mentoring. They do reviews of people. How would you resolve that? I mean, is that just overtime?
Right. Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Mentoring, I can tell you from personal experience that I did all of my mentoring on projects.
Right.
And it was billable time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The administrative part, if you say performance reviews, yeah, you can't charge a performance review to a client.
Right.
Okay. But the key here is it should be a simple performance review system. And I know the HR people hate me when I say it. They love the 360-degree review system and multiple and peer reviews and all this stuff. And I say, come on, what you should do is it's a simple review where the person that they report to administratively gathers comments and data. They don't take forever doing it, and they sit you down for an hour and they go over it with you. And they also look at your self-evaluation, and you keep the process as simple as possible. It's still effective. The processes are ineffective when everybody's disconnected from each other and somebody's doing a review that doesn't work with the employee.
That reminds me, Brian, we have a new working group started. We have a lot of CFOs wanting to, and you said that you would, come into that group and help, talk a little bit and, rub elbows with us. So if you, I'll send you that link when I set that up.
Okay, sure.
I don't think you'll be welcome in the HR group, though. I don't think that's going to work.
The only problem is until everybody gets vaccinated, nobody's rubbing elbows.
Well, we're doing it virtually. All right. So a couple more questions.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, at least. I think you answered that one. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Should you give the business development people overtime? Yeah, wait a minute. Let's ask this one first. What do you suggest as an overhead rate?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm not an expert on government rates.
Yeah.
So if this is a non-governmental rate, you want the lowest overhead rate that you can in order and still be able to effectively operate your firm.
What do you see? Have you seen anything like that? Have you seen?
Yeah. Here it is. The closest, if you look at the sum model,
Mm-hmm.
the S factor basically is the inverse of the overhead rate. And the really, really tightly run overhead type firms are at 70 or 72%.
All right.
Okay, so what? That's about 1.4. That would be that would be your conventional overhead rate. And that could be pretty tough to do sometimes, but there are firms that can do it.
Yes. And we'll have one more. Oh boy, some of them are long. So we'll go back to that business development. Should they be allowed overtime? Because otherwise the PMs don't have time to do the business development. should you allow
Well,
them?
okay. Suppose you're working on my model where the project manager is expected to work
Right.
long-term 44 hours a week. Okay. I don't know whether the 43rd or the 44th hour is business development. All I know is that let's say they had a 90% utilization goal, just to make my math easy. They worked 36 billable hours that week, and they had 8 other hours, and some of it was devoted to marketing.
Right.
End of story. What I'm looking for is that they have a reasonable amount of time, and they know exactly what you want them to do in terms of marketing, and they go do it. And there's an actual marketing plan. The biggest problem firms have in the marketing area is that it is, for most firms, the biggest in-house project they have. No, the biggest project they have. It's bigger than any paid project, and nobody is running it like a project.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always the case, but most of the time that is the case. And that makes life tougher on the people doing the marketing.
Right. All right, well, we're running out of time. So again, that wraps up the session, but just a reminder that you will get an email tomorrow with, or today if I can get it done, with the recording links, both audio and visual, obviously, as attendance certificate, and also any other information that we can offer you. If you want to buy the model, it is on the website. We do have a short link, which means just put in http://www.psmj.com and the word profitability. So /profitability, the short link should get you there. It's capital P in my when I tried it. So and you could always reach out to me and I'll send you the link. But go ahead.
Yeah, you maybe you ought to send the link in writing so nobody.
I will. And people might have other questions too for you. So
Okay. Yeah, B Flynn, BFLYNN at PSMJ.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions you send me.
Yeah, and anything that I send out, you could just reply to. That'll be easy as well. So and his book, volume 1 and 2, is on the website. We've sold a lot of them, but we do have some in stock. So, all right, Brian. Anything else before we say goodbye?
No, I just want to thank everybody for their attention. I know that you've got lots of billable work to do, and this wasn't one of them.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll get cracking on the questions we didn't get to. There was a lot of them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.